All right. So first
Okay.
and foremost, what's your TikTok, just so people know?
My TikTok is Notorious AAV. And I am an Orthodox Marxist. So if you guys like that content, do follow me. But if you don't, probably don't.
Okay. What
Um,
exactly is an Orthodox Marxist?
it's someone that like takes Marx for like word basically. Um, it's different to Marxist Leninists because Marxist Leninism is about well, like I'm still reading theory, but as I interpret it at the moment, it's when people believe that the revolution that should come should be headed in some way by a group of people that are of a higher like social class so that the revolution can actually happen. I might be wrong about that. I'm just like nervous right now.
No, no, no
But
worries. Okay. I'm not
yeah.
gonna. I'm not gonna get into like we don't have to get into communism. I was just
Yeah,
curious
we
as to
don't need
what it
to
was. Yeah,
like
no,
but
I don't worry. I was just curious, just out of the curiosity, what it was. I know that this little engagement we had started. I'm just gonna provide context to it. When you had made a video, basically talking about how you made the claim that you can't be racist towards white people, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and then I had, but first, what I did is I made a joking video. Right now, I'm under a little bit of scrutiny from TikTok. Just for context, I've been speaking out a lot against like pedophilia on the app. I don't know if you're familiar with like the Gemini official. So a lot of myself and a lot of creators have been getting censored and like having their posts removed, and like we're on high watch due to that for some reason. I don't really understand it. But anyway, I made a joke video on your video. You said that like, oh, you can't be racist towards white people, and then I made, or white people created, the concept of race. So I made a joke that was basically, oh, how did we do that if black people are faster than us? It was a joke. It got removed. Then I made the one that you had bounced off of originally was one where like I had been very hyperbolic, where I was like making the claim of hating white people. That was to prove a point that when you produce white hate, you don't get removed. I was very sorely mistaken. That one got removed as well. So then I made like an, I don't know if you saw my actual regular commentary on your original claim on TikTok, or if you just saw like the ridiculous anti-white one.
I think that I didn't get to the other ones before they got removed. Because I didn't even know that you did like a first one where you like did like a joke, to be
Yeah,
honest.
no, it got pulled very very quickly. So
Okay.
yeah, right.
Well,
Um so okay, so then that, and then I remember you had made a claim about a video and you were talking about Martin Luther King and basically how he's justified, and you wouldn't consider racism, but I would consider
Malcolm
his
X actually.
Malcolm X, excuse me, I'm sorry, and
Yeah.
his dislike of white people, like regardless, so that's justification.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So I'm sorry, continue.
no, go ahead. So, well, okay. So basically, I was just gonna say, like, okay, so we're basically gonna have the conversation about whether you can or can't be racist towards white people.
Exactly.
So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
so my stance on that basically is that obviously I mean in context of the racial hierarchy within the United States, and that also includes just like the entirety of the Americas as well as most of Europe, not all of it.
Mhm.
It's very different in, for example, the Balkan region and stuff like that. But so, in context of America, no, I do not believe that you can be racist towards white people just because the concept of race, as I stated in my video, I'm an anthropology and political science double major.
Mhm.
So that's the main thing that I learn about in biological anthropology. One of the main things is that we read about scientific racism. So it's basically the origins of when people started classifying people by race in a Western sense. So the very first usage of race in the way that we contextualize it today is from Système Naturel by Carl Linnaeus, and he was a French biological anthropologist, and he created the first 5 racial categories that we still talk about today: white, black, Asian, Native American, and then he had a 5th category in which that he didn't specify exactly who they were, but just to show how racially biased it was. It was called monstrous, and it basically like identified like certain people, like Aboriginal people and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So with that knowledge and the fact that that information has been used in the like in American society, for example, to justify slavery, right? So that's then we basically separated the like indentured servants in America and the slaves by race,
Mhm.
because it used to be that they had almost like equal status, even though indentured servants would still get paid in the end. But it wasn't until the beginning of the 1700s where we decided, well, we're going to make the black race the one that can be enslaved and the white race that cannot. So that's the origin of the words black and white, too,
Mhm.
to describe race. Um, Also, specifically in this country, which has a lot of like found a lot of its founders were slave owners and were definitely, by today's definition, white supremacist, which is not to say that like, oh, we shouldn't like admire the founding fathers or anything, but that's just the truth, right?
Mhm.
It's impossible for this for a white person in this country to experience racism
Mhm.
because it's not institutionalized. I understand the argument of individual racism, that one person can just decide like, oh, I just hate white people.
Mhm.
However, that's prejudice.
Mhm.
Because if the concept of race in the West, at least, was used to subjugate and to create like a justification as to white people being above other people. So
Mhm.
whiteness was celebrated within our racism. So you can't be racist towards a white person because whiteness in our like understanding of racism
Mhm.
is celebrated,
Okay.
right? So,
Sure.
but it's
Okay.
different in other places. But
Right.
that's
I
what
understand. Right. I
I
understand what
mean.
you're saying. So I acknowledge the fact that white people created racism. Right. I totally get, or rather, race in general. I understand that white people created the concept of race. Um, however, I don't think that that makes it so that white people are disqualified from, being on the receiving end of racism. I would, and I know that you touched on it a little bit about the individualized racism, but like, of course, we could make the argument between individualized racism and then it's systemic racism. So, what I actually want to talk about is systemic racism first, because I think that almost you can't be as a white person, you can't be the victim of systemic racism, right? I think that we could both agree on that.
Yeah, of course.
But I actually wanted to ask your opinion on something, because a lot of my followers, when I make that point, they constantly bring up things like affirmative action, and I think that to an extent it could be kind of considered some form of systemic racism, though it's obviously reactionary to true systemic racism against people of color. But what exactly what are your thoughts on that? Just curious what you think about the idea of
Right.
like affirmative action being like a form of systemic racism against white people.
I definitely wouldn't. I mean, like, I think that just in general, the fact that we have to have like affirmative action is because there is systemic racism against like non-white people. I don't think that you can categorize it as being like racist towards white people, just because even if with affirmative action, most of the people that are in college today, despite the fact that that white people are actually like becoming a minority in America, the
Mhm.
vast majority of people are still white. Um, and that doesn't have to do that much. I don't think that attendance in college counts, um, like, is influenced by affirmative action as much as it's influenced by access to like affirmative action. So I think that even though we are like, perhaps if there is a student that's white and a student that, for example, is black or is Asian, and they have the same test scores and everyone, like everything matches perfectly, but then you look at like the institution, you're like, okay, since we have like 70% white or something, we're going to allow the Asian student to come in. I understand how that can be frustrating.
Mhm.
However, you have to think about how the like amount of people of color that don't have access to actually going to college,
Sure,
right?
I get that.
So,
Well,
yeah,
because I would argue, because I understand what you're saying, and again, like I pretty much agree with you. But what I would argue, and this is just for the context of some of my viewers, is that affirmative action does more at the top, where opportunity has generally already been presented to particular Black Americans, rather than to rise Black Americans up to that point. Which is my issue with systemic racism. I don't think that we've truly proposed any type of, which in my opinion, I'm very much a class reductionist. I don't think that we've proposed a form of wealth redistribution that actually enables and presents opportunity and equity to all marginalized groups, but in this particular instance, Black Americans. And so, like, I think that I think that affirmative action is like a band-aid on a greater issue. I don't know if you necessarily would agree with that, but I just wanted to touch on that particular topic before we got into individualized racism.
Right. No, that's good. And so like I understand how like especially like affirmative action doesn't only get criticism from like white people that are trying to get into college. It also gets criticism from people who come from like, for example, an Asian background, stuff like that.
Yeah, right. I think
Harvard,
that
there was
Asian
a
people happen to be like the victims of
right.
systemic racism, or excuse me, like of affirmative action as well, right? I think that's what
Yeah.
mhm.
I think that affirmative action can definitely be like, I mean, like I probably have like a very different like opinion than most of like your viewers and stuff like that. I think that
Sure.
affirmative action is the first step in getting more people of color to be able to access higher education and being able to like having more of a chance to access generational wealth so we can like close the racial wealth gap. However, I think that we are so like ill prepared right now with the policies that we have in like like in store, like including affirmative action, that even affirmative action is not enough to actually like instill racial equity within the United
Sure, I
States.
agree with that. I think
Yeah.
that we could actually have a nice conversation after we get through the point of individualized racism about how to end systemic racism. But to your point of individualized racism, so we've already acknowledged that on like a macro playing field that it's basically impossible to be racist towards a white person, right? Like systemic racism, you can't be the
Mhm.
victim of that as a white person. So now we're talking about individualized racism, and you brought up the point before that racism is that basically being what I would call racist against a white person is simply just prejudice. But I also would refer to the dictionary definition of racism, and it is a prejudice against people of a particular group.
Right.
Yeah, so like I would
Um,
firmly take the stance that you can absolutely be racist towards white people
right. Okay. So
on
looking
an
at
individual
the
level.
yes. So what you have to understand about that is that the dictionary definitely dictionary definition is right because it talks about racism anywhere in the world, right?
Hmm.
So, but in context of what we're talking about here is we're talking about racism in America.
Hmm.
And America is very different from a lot of countries um, because there hasn't really been a country as built
Hmm.
on the mass like enslavement of people of color,
Okay,
the
so
exodus of
just for
well,
context, because I know no, I agree with what you're saying when it
yeah,
comes to like a country built like we were founded on racism, right?
right. Like
Theoretically we weren't supposed to be because the Constitution says we're not supposed to be, but in practice we were. What I just want to bring up for context is that you made the point that like there's never been a country founded on like the enslavement of
well,
particular groups of
that's I didn't
people.
say never, but not as much.
No,
Like
no, no,
obviously
no, no.
I
I
come
what
from
I'm like
Spain,
the only
so
point I
I
was
don't
trying.
like I have
Yeah,
yeah,
the only point I was trying to make for context was like I agree with what you're saying,
yeah,
but
yeah.
if you remove the race aspect of it, I just want to bring up the fact that like all civilizations in the past, including our own,
Right,
are founded on slavery, not of race
right,
necessarily, slavery, and then colonization, right? So the
exactly.
only addition to that in the United
That
States
it was
is yeah
racialized
is
in
racial, and
the
I just want to
Americas.
bring that up for
Of course.
context. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So, when I'm talking about slavery, I'm talking about racial slavery,
Hmm.
not just any slavery. For example, all European countries, all empires in the past, for example, I think someone in the chat said Rome. Yeah, they were built on slavery and it wasn't towards people of color. Slavery has existed for a long time. However, in context of American history, it specifically affects Black people. When we're talking about individual racism, I totally understand why someone would believe that, like for example, like if someone calls you like I don't know like calls me a cracker or something, right?
Mhm.
You'd be like, oh, that's racism or whatever.
Well, I don't think it's really
But,
racist. I think that's forced outrage from white people, to be
it
honest with you.
doesn't stem like the the place where that racism or that word that's a racial slur stems from is not the same place that
The N
like
word, yeah. I completely
racial
agree with that.
slurs towards people of color stem from.
Sure.
For example, the N word stems from what white people would call their slaves. Cracker stems from the white slave master. So it's not the same
Mhm.
to call someone a cracker as to call someone the N word. You know what I mean?
Sure. No, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
It's
Before
also like when there's a hate crime, again, if there was a hate crime against a white person, it would be an individual thing. Like
Mhm.
it would not like it's not a repeated action. It hasn't been done for 50 years.
Well,
There
right, but
was
that's
never
bringing it
like
back
a
to that's
coup
bringing it back to like
plan
systemic
that
racism.
attacked white
Right.
people.
But
Like there's
that
more
brings it
legitimate,
hold on, that brings it
like
back to systemic racism though.
whatever white people think racism is, what
No,
we
no,
think
right.
racism
But you're bringing it back
and
to systemic.
what like black people
Can
have
you not hear
experienced
me?
as
Can
racism.
you not hear me?
So I wouldn't even call it
Is
racism
it
because
am I
even
muted?
if I get attacked, for
Am
example,
I muted right now? Is that what's happening?
someone who's a person of color and they claim
Is it
that
that
it's because
I'm muted?
um,
Am I muted on your
I'm
end?
not gonna like be
Am I mute?
like
Am I
there's
muted?
not it's not supported at any
What?
point by the state.
What? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
You still hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello? What?
Wait, I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me. Hold on. That was bizarre. Let me see something.
Hello?
Hold on a second. Yeah, no, my input device is fine. Why is it that she can't hear me? Hold on. Can you hear me? Can you hear? Because I think my Twitch is fine. What happened? Did you accidentally mute me?
Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Was I talking over you? Like I literally cannot hear you
No,
right now.
it's okay.
I did not mute you. Hold on. I'm so confused.
let me drop out of this call. You guys can hear me in the
This
stream,
is
I
a
think.
what
Can
now?
you hear me
Hello?
now? This is fine. Why is it that she can't hear me?
Oh my god.
Can you? She just has to be on her end. Can you hear? Because I think my Twitch is fine. What happened? What? She muted me. That's silly. She muted. We'll have to.
Wait, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Did you
I
accidentally hit
can
like a
hear.
mute button or something?
Yeah, I did.
It's
That's
okay.
so
It's okay.
annoying. I'm sorry.
Hey, no, it's
Anyway,
okay.
that's so funny.
So we had
I
talked.
literally started talking over you,
Yeah.
didn't I?
No, it's
Oh my
okay.
God.
It's okay that you actually muted. So there's a couple of points you brought up. The most recent point
Yeah.
you had mentioned, you started to bring it back. Oh, sorry, I forgot the specific point. Unfortunate. But you were starting to bring up the points about how like it's not like it's a one-off situation when it comes to white people, like being racist towards white or prejudiced towards white
Yeah.
people. And then like I was just trying to make the argument that like you were bringing it back to systemic racism, and we're talking about like individualized racism. Like I acknowledge
Okay,
systemic
cool.
racism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I would contest a particular point that you made before because you talked about how like the dictionary definition is expands to what the world's definition of particular things are. And so, like, based on that, they don't really apply to, I guess you'd consider it Western society. But then I would argue back that Western society specifically made that dictionary definition. But then also, even if the definition didn't support what I was saying, I think that we can at least acknowledge that, like, pretty much everything, race included, is a social construct, no?
Yeah.
And so, like, we have the ability to have conversations about it, right? So what we're doing now is we're basically having a societal conversation about whether you can or cannot be racist towards white people. Now, you brought up before about the individualized aspect of it. My argument would be, well, really, actually, I ask you this question: what benefit do we get from making it so that white people cannot be the targets of racism? What benefit does society get from that?
Making a fact.
Well, no, but it's not a fact.
recognizable.
It's like it would be very subjective, right? It's a social construct. So, what would be like
Right.
the benefit of saying, "Hey, you cannot be racist towards white people on an individualized level"? Like, what would be the benefit of that?
So basically, the benefit of making like white people realize that they do not face racism like black people do or people of color.
Well,
basically, you mean?
that's a different point though, right? Because the idea that white people can't face racism in the way that black people can't face racism is something I very much agree with you. But
Right.
does that necessarily make it not racist? That's where we're coming from. Because I would propose the idea that if you say that white people cannot be the targets of racism, the one thing that you're doing is you're setting a higher standard for white people than everybody else, right? Because you can't be racist towards them, right? So they have to watch every single thing that they say. Meanwhile, they don't have that same, we'll say, luxury or privilege afforded back to them. And then it also promotes like the demonization of white people because, again, you
Privilege
can't
is
be
that you
racist towards
can't be
white people.
racist against white people.
Well, no, but I disagree, right? Because again, we're talking about a social
Right.
construct. So this conversation like that we're having is like fantastic, I think, because it gets us to have like why would that? So I'm just asking you to substantiate your claim because I would rather promote a society that understands that there's a difference between the racism that a white person receives and a black person, right? You had made a point before by Malcolm X, and I don't want to use any like intense words, because they were what you said was correct, but it's my Twitch. I don't want to be departnered. And so about how like he didn't like white people, right? Malcolm X like hated white people. He hated white liberals. He hated white people, right? Hello? Am I muted again?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I said,
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So you made the argument that his racism was like absolutely justified, right? Because his racism was basically his individualized racism against white people or hatred of white people stemmed from more of a systemic aspect. And that's something that a white person can never experience. And I agree that we should, as a society, like contextualize racism for different groups of people. But if you bring it down to like a very baseline, like level, if you simplify it, and this is the example I like to use all the time, right? And it's a question that I would ask you is, if I walked up and I hit a guy in the face, would you consider that assault?
I mean, with context.
No, just like no contact. I just walked up and hit him in the face. Is that assault?
Well, the point is that like without context,
No.
I can't define it as.
No, I understand. Well, no, but I hit him in the face. It was like it was unprovoked. Like legally, I just hit him in the face. He didn't cause me any physical harm. I just walked up and punched him.
Yeah, sure, it would be assault.
Yeah. So now, if you found out that guy slept with my wife and I hit him in the face, is it still assault?
I mean, it's still assault, but it's
justifiable. That's how I would define racism between white and black people. Is that like it's more justifiable to be racist as a black person towards a white person, but that doesn't necessarily make it not racist.
So the video that I made about Malcolm X, I said like kind of like at the beginning, I imitated like a white person being like, "Why do you like Malcolm X? He's like racist towards white people." I don't genuinely believe he was actually racist towards white people.
I think he was.
Right? So I think that
justifiably.
I think that he hated white supremacy, and I think that he was prejudiced against white people.
Right, but like we said, like the dictionary definition of prejudice is racism.
Yeah. So, and you said that the dictionary definition was written by like Western academics, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So when has that been updated since like it was first?
So
written?
it was.
Also,
it was. I would say
like
rather recently, because it does contextualize that most of the time racism is due to some kind of marginalization. Right. It doesn't assert that you have to. No, sure. It doesn't assert that you have to be marginalized, though. My only point I was bringing up is that it contextualized that, so it was updated rather recently. But
okay.
Yeah, back to my point before, though, is like what benefit do we have as a society that saying, because I propose that we have like there's disadvantages to saying white people can't be the target of racism, and that is demonization of white people. So like I would ask you, like, what are actual benefits of saying like, oh, you can't be racist towards a white person? Like, what does that do as a society? How does that unite us? Because to me that leads to more division, because the idea of contextualizing racism based on the color of your skin makes perfect sense to me. It makes sense that a black person would have like many more excuses to be racist towards white people specifically, because white people basically craft and have ownership over our society. But what benefit do we get from, instead of contextualizing that, just completely dismissing all racist acts against white people?
Okay, so what we get out of that is that we no longer get those groups of people that claim that racism towards white people is just as much of a big problem as racism towards black people.
I think that would exacerbate it, though, because those white people they're not going to be like, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong. So, they're going to make it worse. And I would say that would anger them.
I don't really like put my definitions to appease white supremacists.
Sure,
Though.
no, but you
So
made
really,
but you made the argument that like white people would calm down, the white supremacists would calm down. If maybe I'm mistaking the interpretation of what you had said.
no. So what I said, that doesn't mean that white supremacists will calm down. Nazis will forever be Nazis, right?
Sure.
But when we stop listening to Nazis, right, and we start putting people of color first, when we start listening to people that are not Nazis, and we don't like start believing, like we stop believing that racism towards white people is firstly as bad as racism towards people of color, and we start like realizing that we have a huge amount of privilege, and even if like one person is called like some like white racial slur,
Mhm.
it does not, it cannot never be like,
Sure,
even
but
if it's
I
individual
agree with
racism,
you. I
right?
agree with you on
Like
all
for
those points.
right. So when we do that, when people realize, oh wait, whatever I face is nothing like what everyone else's faces, that's
Mhm.
when people start realizing, oh shit, we should probably like actually fix this problem. We should stop listening to people from the far right.
Mhm.
We should stop listening to Nazis, and we
Right.
should actually start trying to like fix this problem.
Mhm. But
Because
do you
I
think
think
people
that the
aren't trying to
problem,
fix the problem?
no, obviously not. If you're a white person in America, most white people don't want to talk about the actual things that like will fix racial inequality in America. I mean, like if we talk about like what will actually fix racial
Mhm.
inequality in America, people will call me a communist. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
Well,
like
I
tea.
want to get
You know
into
what I
that
mean?
in a little bit
But
because
like,
I definitely want to talk about that because that's a fantastic conversation. But all the points you brought up before can exist while still not like, but while still maintaining the idea that black people can be racist towards white people. I mean, if a black person walked up and hit a white person in the face and said, "I hate you because you're white," that's racist just in the same way that a white person doing the same to a black person is racist. The only difference is their potential history, right? That's basically what we're talking about. And I would make the
black
argument
people hate white. Like if a black person hates a white person,
it's
it's
more
because,
justifiable. It's not necessarily
well,
because of systemic
it's
racism, but
not
it is
just that
justifiable.
it's more justifiable. It's
Mhm.
because white people have oppressed black people
Right, but I would
for
argue,
400
but the
years,
thing is,
right?
but no, but I would
But
argue,
it's not
sure,
it's like
hold on,
that's
but I would argue that that most white people aren't actively contributing to that system. Right? They
that
like
would
well,
still be
no, no, no,
prejudice, and
no,
it's
no, no.
still
Well, no,
wrong.
we're talking about the oppression point you brought up, right? White
Yeah,
people
yeah.
aren't actively contributing to that. I would make an argument that like rich white people may be actively contributing to it. In fact, I would go as far as to say that rich white people are effectively using minorities as a way to like redirect anger towards them for situations like, oh, I lost my job. It's because of somebody from South or Central America or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Right.
I wouldn't say that white people are actively contributing to the system. Now you can make the argument that they benefit from the system
Right.
for
But
sure,
if you're
but
complacent to it,
no,
right?
but like you had made no right, but that's due to like a general level of ignorance. But you had made the point before that like if we say that white people can't be the target of racism, that's going to have a net positive on society. But I would say that most white people would be very turned off by that because you're completely dismissing their existence. And to a point you brought before about how white people are slowly becoming the minority, which by the way I care about 0%. But once they're a minority and we still maintain these ideas that you can't be racist towards white people, now you're going to have white people literally as the marginalized group. So what it seems like is the idea of making it so that you can't be racist against a white person just leads to a long-term negative impact of hatred against white people rather than a long-term positive impact of bringing people together and even going as far as to removing what race is. And since white people created race as a social construct, we would ultimately want to remove race of like the concept of race completely from society years from now, and you cannot do that by having different perspectives or different rule sets on racism applied to different people in the United States or really in the world in general.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, what I would like to like point out kind of about this is that sorry, I was painting my nails. So hold on, I just lost my train of thought. Okay. So I get that like a lot of white people will be turned off by that.
Hmm.
At first, to be honest, I mean like I had to unlearn this stuff by myself, right?
Hmm.
To be honest, like I would hear that and be like, no, you can be like racist towards white people, but what I mean by you can't be racist towards white people, right? Um that's what we have to like, that's what education is for, right? That's what we have to like end up teaching people. I know that you're going to be turned
Well,
off
I would
by
say
it,
that I
but
wouldn't.
that's
I
like,
don't agree with that. It has to be the thing taught. I mean, I think that my perspective could, or not even just mine. I have a shared perspective that could be taught to the same, if not, honestly, in my opinion, greater level of effectiveness.
oh wait, are you still, hold on.
Oh no, I just wanted to make that point. Yeah, no, I'm
Oh,
just
okay, cool,
I
cool.
just
I
want
was
to
like,
make
oh my
that.
God, did he get muted again? I was
No, it's
okay, this is what's happening. Okay, so my the plug for my earphones is literally like if it moves even slightly, like I
Mhm.
can't hear you.
Okay.
But it's good. So I've been like super like hyper vigilant about it.
It's
But
no
anyway,
problem.
so yeah. Okay, so I believe that you said that me, for example, saying like that sentence will turn off a bunch of white people and will hinder progress and create more division,
Mhm.
right?
And yeah, and have long-term negative impacts of basically like demonizing white people, especially once white people do ultimately become the minority in the United States, which is happening. I mean, by 2040 or 55, we're going to be 49% of the United States, and it's just going to continue from there.
Right.
Your mic went
Always
back.
been an argument. This has always been an argument to hinder process of racial equality in the United States, right?
What's that?
So,
My argument?
like you don't mean like not like what like I don't think that you don't want like racial equality for sure.
Oh, I
Like,
do
you
for
know what I mean?
sure. Yeah.
You do for sure. Um, but it's like the very like soft, like not like really hard on like, but like it is a sort of like ignorance to what racism is,
I don't think
right?
that's true. I understand what you're saying.
Well,
We
let
because
me
I
explain,
want you to
right?
understand we have two clashing perspectives, and the
Yeah, we
reality
of
is
course
that
have
yeah,
like
no. All I want to say is that like we have two clashing perspectives, which is fine because I think we mostly agree, and I think
yeah,
that we could have a nice conversation about how to reduce marginalization. And we're not going to agree on this point, but that's okay. But like what I would say is these are social constructs, right? So at the end of the day, if society takes hold of either of our perspectives and we push forward, those are going to be what's considered some form of fact, but it's going to be a subjective fact basically because it's a societal construct. But I don't think that I'm being ignorant simply by making sure that I apply the term, the idea that you can be racist but to everybody, and while also contextualizing the ideas that would make you that would generate that race. Because most white people who are racist generate that racism through an idea of white supremacy, and also adhering to stereotypes, right? While as black people would be racist because of the systemic racism that they received. Simply put, the only disagreement we have is literally the label of racism. And in my opinion, I have stated reasons why you should not remove white people from being the targets of racism. I think I've done a rather good job of presenting that like there's many negatives to it, and I honestly I don't think that you've really given me a solid positive as to why white people shouldn't
right.
be the targets of
So
racism.
if you let me talk, I will give you one.
Okay.
So again, so basically, using the fact that you can discriminate against white people has been used in every single racial movement in the United States, right? When the civil rights,
Maybe, I guess.
yes,
Sure. Okay.
for sure, right?
Hmm.
So during the civil rights era, people were talking about how, like Martin Luther King Jr. was like, because firstly, let's talk about how MLK was not a revered, like person back then. He
Hmm.
was like on the FBI watch list and stuff like that. People did political cartoons about how MLK was like causing violence in the cities and stuff like that. And the
Sure.
main argument by people that opposed civil rights was, oh, they're demonizing white people because we're doing separate but equal.
Hmm.
Okay. During the Black Liberation Movement, which happened in the 70s through the 80s, right? I really love that movement, by the way. It's like something I'm really passionate about. It's very influenced by Malcolm X. Angela Davis came out. During that time, Assata Shakur, Afeni Shakur, love them all. So the argument there was, oh, black people hate white people because they want to be liberated,
Hmm.
right?
Sure.
Demonizing white people. So every single one of these movements has never been about excluding white people from anything, or like it's just been to try to liberate black people from racism. But if
Sure.
you counter that with, oh, but you're racist towards me, who's a white person, because you're assuming that I'm racist towards you. are like, you know what I mean? So it's
I
kind of
understand
like
what you mean.
if we stop using the argument that you can be racist towards white people, because you can disagree with me all you want, and that's okay. Like, we can disagree on that specific thing.
Sure.
And I know that we both want racial equality in the United States. But saying that you can be racist towards white people when every single white power movement and every single black power movement follows a completely different like route. For example, like, to claim that black power being pro like black and everything is being racist towards white people.
Well, I would say if people say, if I would say that people said black power, like, there are black supremacist groups.
Right, but
Yeah.
they are nearly not as dangerous as white supremacists.
Simply because they don't have the ability, they don't have a hold, they don't have a stranglehold. Like, the only thing that makes white power worse than black power is the fact that white power has a stance inside, like, they have control over the system, generally speaking. So somebody saying black power isn't going to be as dangerous, because
the only thing that makes white
it's
power
it's
worse
power.
Than white power.
Yeah, no, the only thing that makes black power, the only thing that makes white power worse than black power is power dynamics. Is that white people have more power? That's it. So
no, the worst thing about white power, comparing it to black power, is that black power is about the liberation of black people and being pro-black. White power is just about being anti-black. If it was about being pro-white, they would have been pro-immigrant, like, the KKK wouldn't have attacked Catholics. The KKK wouldn't have attacked Italian immigrants. It's never about being pro-white. It's always about being anti-something.
Well, it sounds like you just said that white people were targeted by the KKK, no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, the concept of race
so that would changes. So that would be racist against them, though, right?
Yeah, because Italians were not considered white back then.
So then, at what point? So let's say we follow your chain of thought, and we said that white people could be the target of racism. Right. When does that end? When does it end that we redefine the dictionary definition of racism to include white people?
We include that when there's actual power dynamic in which we oppress white people more than we oppress.
Are you saying that the goal is to oppress white people then?
No, the goal is, that's obviously not what I'm saying.
No.
What I'm saying, we do not want to include, the thing is that we don't want to add to the dictionary and make it so we can be racist towards white people. That's never the goal.
No, but if white people and black people were effectively equal, and the dictionary,
so hold on, there would be no racism.
No, but the dictionary definition would still be maintained, right? That you can't be racist towards white people. So then, at what point do we pivot and say, okay, white and like all people of color are equal? Now we need to change the definition so that everybody can be the target of racism. When do we do that? Like, is that a plan?
If all people are equal, there wouldn't be racism. Again, so the plan, like what I'm saying.
So you're saying we want to eliminate the concept of race entirely.
Yeah, of course.
So then do you think that it's racist of white people to say that they don't see any color?
I think that it's a total, like, ignorance to the world around us. I think that if you, like, justify, like, your ignorance or something by saying, oh, I don't see color or something, you should see color.
But isn't that the end goal?
Live in a racial... Yeah, that is the end goal. But until we actually see color and we actually are pro people of color, like, how are we going to be able to be, like, colorblind, right?
Sure.
Like, we can't just, like, all of a sudden, like, all decide, like, oh, we'll just forget about, like, racism. No, we need reparations for the people that suffered racism.
Right. Well, so okay, so if I'm the white guy in charge, right?
Right.
Why would I care about black people if, and this is what making it so you can't be the target of racism is, you're completely removed from it, if it does seem like there is a movement to be anti-white. Now, I want to be very clear.
Think there's a movement to be anti-white?
No, I think that there is the idea. The only issue that I have is that this idea of racism not being applied to white people. And again, I've provided full context. But there's going to be a lot of white people who are going to feel disenfranchised by the idea that they can't be the target of racism, and they're going to repel the movement, and it's going to create a bunch of angry white people, and it honestly is going to promote white supremacy. Like, that's what's going to happen.
What we do, no matter what we do, even if we appease white people as much as we want.
No, but it's not about appeasing white people. It's about treating everybody the same. It's about treating everybody the same and then moving forward from there.
Well, that's not really treating everybody the same.
No, but it is.
If you're telling, no.
If I'm telling you that all people can be the victim of racism, but based on the context of of your life, white people, the racism against white people isn't as bad. I'm not promoting
really
white
not.
supremacy. No, I'm promoting exactly what you're saying. The difference is that I'm actually talking about the fact that there are instances of individualized racism against white people, and we have the same thought process, except for that
Individualized
one.
racism comes from systemic racism. It wouldn't exist if systemic racism didn't, right?
Sure,
If
okay,
hierarchical positions of race didn't exist, we wouldn't have the concept of one race. We wouldn't have this
sure.
assumption that I'm better than someone else because of my skin color. So individualized racism comes from actual systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
So if a black person is quote unquote racist towards a white person, it's not because they think they're better than white people. It's because white people have been oppressing them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the same thing as being racist, because you don't think you're better than them. You know that their ancestors have oppressed yours. So it's prejudice.
Well, they may have
Just
oppressed
like,
yours, right? Because I'm not from this country. And I know
right.
that's a very shallow argument, but I'm not from this country.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a third
But
generation immigrant.
if you're here in America,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if you're an immigrant. I'm an immigrant, right? I'm a Spanish immigrant. That's
Sure.
like, I'm white, right? I benefit from whiteness here in America.
Sure.
And it's different in Spain, for example, because like, for example, my dad's mixed, right? He's
Mhm.
half Filipino, he's half white. And I don't look as white as other people in Spain, right?
Mhm.
So in Spain, I'm considered a different race because race is a concept. I'm not considered white in Spain, okay?
Mhm.
I get treated differently there. I benefit from my whiteness in America, even if I've like none of my ancestors like owned slaves, none of them had like any addition to the racism that there is in America, but I'm not like as scared to walk outside. Well, maybe because I'm a woman I am, but not because of my race. Like to go outside in the dark at night, right?
Sure.
Or like I'm not scared when a police officer stops me, even though I'm not a white person that like has created the system of white supremacy in the United States, right? But I am a white person in the United States, so I have an entirely different like experience than even my dad in the United States.
Well,
right?
so basically, what you're saying is
yeah.
that you, to an extent, benefit from being white. I completely agree with that. Again, I want to close this segment out because, like, we're not going to agree, which is totally fine. I'm going to just say my final piece, and then you can say your final piece, and then I want to talk about the
Sure.
solutions because I think that's a really great conversation.
Cool. Yes, that'd be
So
great.
I just wanted to assert a couple of things. The first and foremost is that, like, I propose the idea that by having this double standard and completely, having this double standard in the situation where you're basically saying that white people could never be the victims of individualized racism is a slippery slope to not only holding white people to a higher standard, but also to demonizing white people. In the future, once there's no more marginalization of white people, the continued idea of being reinforced that white people, to an extent, are basically less than because they can't be the victims of racism will, in the long term, make white peoples become marginalized after that power is gone, right? After the white power is gone, like white people controlling the system is gone. And because of the understanding that people have of that, it's going to actually compel and generate more white supremacists. Because I would argue that most white people want equality. They're simply ignorant to the pathway there, right? And then I would and I would like to make one more assertion, and this isn't me trying to shit on you, but from my perspective, I think that there is an issue in the United States of very, very intelligent people such as yourself who are so very intelligent that they are able to construct reasons for particular things that really cannot be applied properly. In theory, what you're saying sounds right, but the application of it completely miscontextualizes the fact that nobody or most people aren't as intelligent as you. And so under that rule set, people aren't going to be happy. They're not going to see it from your frame of thought. And I would guarantee you that people would be able to pick up my frame of thought better. And while you may say, well, that's not fair, or you may still think that your perspective is better, we are a society full of different people with different backgrounds, different understandings, and different levels of intelligence. And I would argue that, like, not considering their perspective at least a little bit is something that's not going to be positive, and it will lead to the divisiveness of specifically the United States of America.
Like, totally understand what you mean by that. So I think that what I want to say on that is that what I learned, the way that sorry, what had just happened? Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Sorry. My computer did a thing. Okay. I think that it's very easy to be able to have conversations and to educate people if they are willing to listen. I think that as soon as you're like as soon as you can connect with people, for example, through a common cause, for example, like class consciousness, something like that, you can like understand concepts such as the sentence that I said that like you might have disagreed with, which is like racism can't affect white people. Because I totally understand that there are white people that come from every single background, right? There are immigrant white people. There are poor white people that are also suffering. But so hearing that they have white privilege, hearing that they can't have racism towards them, especially if you are like if people are constantly making fun of them, for example, on Twitter, being like, "Oh my God, like look at this cracker with like in like his trailer park or whatever." I understand how people will look at that and be like, "Well, they're being racist against me" and stuff like that. And they are 100% being prejudiced, and prejudice is never okay, right?
Hmm.
So any prejudice towards anyone, whether it be homophobia, whether it be like a racial prejudice, right? If you don't, or like immigrant status, stuff like that, that's wrong. You shouldn't be prejudiced towards white people. Like, but in context, like my argument basically was in context of using the word race to say that you like your experience racism in this country is really hard if you're a white person. And I don't think it's viable because our systems, our justice systems, our criminalizations of people, our like history is so like flooded with white supremacy that it is so hard for someone to have a hard life in America for being white. It can be for so many other reasons. You can be gay, you can be poor, but for being white, it's
Yeah, well,
not. And
that's getting
it's,
into like the idea of like intersectionality and whatnot, right?
yeah, of course. Yeah, because like obviously, like just because you're white doesn't mean you're privileged, but because you're white, you're racially privileged.
Hmm. Sure,
Yeah.
I can agree to that.
So that's just my that's what I mean by that. But we did want to talk about solutions.
Yeah, I very much would like to
Yeah.
talk about solutions.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
you did touch on what was it, reparations before. So, what do you think the solution is to like ending systemic racism in the United States? Like, what would you propose?
Honestly believe that the systems that we use that actually like cause the most harm to the Black community should definitely be abolished. I
Well,
think
like,
that
which systems
either
are those?
we need either extreme reform and defunding of the police or we need abolishment.
Hmm.
Because those, and I'm not saying that all police in all countries like are bad or anything. I wouldn't say that everyone goes into the police force to with the intent to like inflict police brutality on people. Definitely not, right?
Hmm.
But specifically, our police force descended from slave patrols, and that's just a fact,
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
right?
Yeah.
So,
So,
and
so
it wasn't like a huge transition where they changed all the rules. And apart from that, our Constitution criminalizes, like in the clause where it grants slaves freedom, it says that criminals aren't free, right? So
sure.
that has for 100% added to police brutality. I also think that we have to have a huge prison reform
Hmm.
because that like literally our prison system, not only is it like extremely racially biased, our justice system and everything, like that's not even like something that you can argue, um but it's like it's so embedded into our economy that it is so hard to stop putting people in prison.
Hmm.
And
Do you?
we need like more funding for rehabilitation, stuff like that,
Sure, I agree.
instead of just locking people up,
So,
right?
do you have another, like, any other way that you would, just, defeat systemic racism? Because you touched on reparations. Are like you in favor of reparations? Because I want to get through. I want to get like each of your points, and then I want to like go through them
I would
individually.
definitely be in favor of reparations.
Okay.
And I personally like I am. At the same time, I understand how it's like really hard to implement now, and they should
Mhm.
have been given like as soon as slavery like
That I agree with.
ended.
I think
You
that
know what I mean?
once it
Like
happened, they
because
should have. But
they should have,
unfortunately, it's like hundreds of years later. So now we're
yeah.
in a different
Black people
situation.
still like deserve reparations for sure, right?
Hmm.
Like, but I take like for my stances in order to like fix like systemic racism, racial wealth gaps in the United States.
Mhm.
I don't look at it as much like one thing that really angers me that people do is that they assume that if we have more like obviously I'm for diversity, like I love it, great, awesome, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But it's fake diversity if you don't go through these systemic like changes within our systems, right?
Sure.
So basically when people argue that oh my god, if we just like elect more like people of color into office, if we oh my god, like let's get this Wall Street like executive
You don't think it
who's a
would have a
woman of
positive
color.
impact to get more
No,
people of color?
obviously not, because
No?
those are people that are like, I mean,
You don't think that
just
you don't believe in
for
the idea of fighting the system from within? Because I understand basically what you're saying is they
I
have to conform. They
understand,
have to
like,
conform to the
to an
particular
extent,
system,
but,
like
like,
Camilla
we
Harris, right? Like she had a.
right.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Kamala Harris, like, I mean, I think that people, like, I mean, like, I'm obviously coming to this as a leftist. Like, I wasn't
Sure.
really happy about, like, Biden or Harris, and she does have, like, a very, like, very questionable
Yeah,
criminal
history.
justice history.
Sure.
But in recent years, it's true that she has voted 96%, for example, with Bernie Sanders.
Sure.
But even like more progressive Democrats and stuff like that, no, I think it's very hard for Democrats or like even like or Republicans, like whoever, right, to actually like implement that much like change just because none of them are actually like actively implementing the things that we
Mhm.
actually need. For
Well,
example,
I
Bernie
think that
Sanders,
I
yeah,
think that
like
the question of what we do and don't need, that's something that that's the thing that we're gonna have a conversation about right now, right? Because
but like
I don't really
we
think
don't need
that.
more like diverse, like obviously we do need like more
Sure.
diverse
Well, you said you
representation
made
in
the
the
argument
House.
that
I don't.
we need to reconstruct the police, the prison, and reparations, right? Is
Yes.
there any other thing specifically? Then we can go through them point by point. Is there anything
Well,
else?
obviously we would have to like abolish ICE for
Okay.
sure, because that's
For
like
black
just
people though, I think that like I understand ICE.
for
I know
people
that
of color, right?
sure.
Definitely for like a
Yeah,
majority, like the
I'm not
majority.
super educated on ICE, so I'm going to stay away from that specifically. I know that there
Okay.
have been abuses in it, but I'm just going to stay away from that only because I don't think that like I can really have a conversation about that accurately. And I also think that like for the most part, we've been kind of relegating this to like black, black people in the United States. So first
So
and
if we
foremost,
talk about, if you want to talk about Black people in the United
well,
States,
I
the
first want to go
first thing,
with like the like police, right? Like because you had made a point
mhm,
before where you're talking about abolishing the police system, right? And I
right?
understand that there are roots of white supremacy and slavery when it comes to police. And I also understand that, especially in the past, there was absolutely targeting of police. But I would say nowadays, this is my claim, and systemic racism exists, so I want to kind of give this to you in like a contextualized manner. My claim now is that systemic racism is technically illegal, right? It's illegal to redlining laws are illegal. That doesn't eliminate the echo effect of what happened, but I would generally argue that the police aren't necessarily racist per se. It's a couple of things. One thing, and this is very unfortunate, it's a little bit of a tough take. I would like you to try to swallow it because it might sound a bit intense. The one thing is that, like any other job, when the thing that you deal with the most, when something that you deal with a lot is a big problem, you start to dislike that thing. And I would say that like systemic racism in the capacity that it has generated a very poor culture in black communities is making police officers not like black people as much. That's the first thing that I
So
would like.
that is racism, though. That is systemic racism.
Sure, but that systemic racism comes from the lack of
Comes
equity, not
from the over
necessarily. No,
policing
no, well, no,
of
no, no.
those
I wouldn't
black
say that. I would say it
communities,
comes from
right?
the lack of equity of black communities rather than the actual police per se. Because I understand the argument of over policing, but the reason that like these impoverished black communities are over policed is because they have more crime associated with them, and the reason they have more crime
More
associated.
crime because they're more over
Yeah,
policed. Because
no,
more
but they
crime
had
is
more crime,
reported.
right? So basically, the argument, the logical rule set that people followed, and like I don't think that this is the solution, but was there's more crime happening in these impoverished black areas, so let's send more people. It's not like there was magically like more crime now that they're in there, right? It's that there was more crime there due to pure lack of opportunity and pure systemic racism that caused them to commit more crimes so that they could actually live, because their choice was either commit a crime and make money some way or die. That was their choice. I would say that that stems more from lack of equity rather than from the police necessarily being racist nowadays. And I think that that's supported to an extent by the fact that my understanding is that Hispanic Hispanic and black police officers are generally harsher towards other minorities or people of color or BIPOC
Right.
people
So,
than
okay.
white
So
people are.
basically, what you're arguing right now
Mhm.
is that it's not the police officers that are like causing the systemic racism. It's the lack to like access to education, to more
It's the
jobs
pure.
and stuff
I would
like
say that
that, right?
most, for the
Okay.
most part,
So
it is the
let's
lack
talk
of
about that.
equity in Black communities. Yeah, sure.
One way to actually like fix systemic racism really well,
Mhm.
as you address like lack of education does like drive people to have
Well, I
different
said
options
equity,
for
pure
life, right?
equity. Yeah,
Yeah, pure equity,
I
right?
do to an extent reject the
Um,
idea of like education as like
right.
a pure like
So why
push
don't we
forward.
have free education?
Why don't we have what?
Like, why don't we have free colleges? Why don't we
I
have,
don't think that would
for
solve the
example,
problem. I honestly don't think that it would be worth the amount of money that we
you
would
don't think
invest.
that if most people in the United States that are impoverished are people of color, if
Mhm.
they had the chance to go into higher education and get a degree, you don't think that that's going to excel them farther?
I
And
think no, no,
they
no, no.
don't have to like
So
get a crazy scholarship. They
no.
don't have
So
to like
here's
we were talking about
right. No, I
we were
want to.
talking
I
about
want to like answer that question. No, I have actually a
yeah.
perspective on the question. So
So
here, yeah.
yeah.
So one of two things are going to happen, right? So we have to acknowledge the fact that there are people in all poor areas, but we're specifically talking about impoverished Black areas.
Hmm.
The dropout rates are higher. People don't give a shit about school. They don't care about the government because the government doesn't work for them, and they're
What,
comfortable.
like in Black communities?
Yeah. So like there are people who in impoverished Black areas. There's basically two types of people. There's those people, right? Who don't go to school. They have higher dropout rates, right? Some of them are pushed through school just for the sake of getting pushed through school. They have worse teachers. Part of that's because the teachers don't give a shit anymore, right? There's individuals in the communities that are that, and then there are people who would actually take advantage of the systems that we proposed. My argument is let's say that we did implement a lot of like we dumped a lot of money into people in general, poor people, let's say Black Americans, being able to go to college. One of two things will happen
Okay.
once they get into college, right? They're either going to go to college, get a great education, and then when they get out, they're either going to leave their area because there's not going to be opportunities in that particular area for what they just excel in and what they just got a degree in, or they're going to stay and not find a job. So what's going to happen is you're going to take the quote unquote best of that particular community and you're going to push it into another community and you're going to continuously propagate poverty in those particular areas. So what I would say instead is to provide equity to those particular areas. And I'm very much a universal basic income type of person because I think that we need to take money and funnel it directly into these areas to provide opportunity first. Opportunity, in my opinion, will always be better than education. And once we build this foundation of opportunity for people to live comfortably and have a solid living, then we could start talking about the luxury basically of education. I'm not saying education doesn't work, but I'm more of the type of person that says we need to provide community opportunity over individualized opportunity if we really want to
Right.
fight this problem.
But in the richest country in the world, I don't think that education's a luxury, right? And I'm totally for universal income as well, right? But why does it have to be one or the other? And it's
I
kind of
don't think that
like
it necessarily has to be one or the other. I think that it should be universal basic income first because it is massively beneficial. And also, we do have to keep in mind, like, there's a class issue, right? We do need people to stop dodging
of
taxes and
course.
pay their taxes better. But we also need to keep in mind that we only have so much money. And right now, before the coronavirus, we were pushing a $1 trillion annual federal deficit. So if we're going, my perspective comes from, if we're going to do something, let's do the most comprehensive and solid plan that will solve the most problems first. And then once we get control of our debt, then we can absolutely talk about universal education to some capacity. But I'm more of a slow, steady progress guy rather than let's throw a bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks. Because I think that UBI
So
would be.
how would universal income be more effective than providing education for people? I mean, like, obviously, like, that's not the only, like, thing that I'm proposing. I also
Mhm.
think that, like, people are very not benefited by the fact that we don't have any free health care for people, and people are, like, financially burdened, especially in Black communities and other
Sure.
communities of
I believe
color.
in a single payer system that still maintains
Right.
private
That's
insurance.
great. That's good, right?
So, right, no, that's a form
But
of
it
welfare
shouldn't be like
distribution
just
done in a
one
positive way.
thing. Yeah. So, I mean, like, that's just like one thing that I definitely like think would help because I
Sure.
don't think that it's not necessarily that that education like people in Black communities don't take education more seriously and they drop out just because their education systems are not very well funded,
So
right?
how would you
We
better hold on, but
send
how would you better fund their education systems then? What do you think is the biggest problem in education systems in these impoverished
I
Black
think the
areas?
biggest problem is that not only do we like like we don't pay attention who we put into like these schools to teach
I think it's
people
bad teachers.
anything. And I also think that
Why do you
like
think
it's
there would be bad
heavily
teachers though?
policed even within the in the high schools and stuff like that.
Sure. I would like to know, like, what is it? Because I do agree with you to an
I
extent.
think that also
But
like
why do we
the
have bad
majority,
teachers? I would say it's because people don't want
well,
to
the
go to those
majority of the
areas.
people that I mean, like this is not to say anything about like that people people that are part of the military because like my whole entire family's part of the military and stuff like that. But as like in order to be a teacher, you do have to be like a more like more of a social worker than a soldier, right? But the most people that we recruit in order to be teachers for these people in low-income communities are veterans.
Well,
And that's
they're
just the
people.
truth.
Generally speaking, they're people who will actually take the job because most people don't want.
Exactly.
But we have to ask
Right,
ourselves.
but the
But hold
reason,
on, hold on.
the reason
Why?
that's
The
why
question is
it's
why?
important.
Why? No, I know, but the question is why is that? And it's because people don't want to work in those areas because they pay less and because the students tend to be rambunctious
So
and
if we
rambunctious and all that stuff.
actually fund them
No, no, no,
and we
no, but no, I'm getting to that. Universal basic income gives them more money. That would honestly, every single time there's some kind of a budget proposal for schools, it's always more computers or more this or that. If we simply pay our teachers better, then we're going to see teachers actually work
but
harder.
that's not just universal
No, but
like
universal
income,
base,
right?
no, but universal basic
But
income
like
would
it's
pay them
like
better.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
so that
also
would be.
giving people more salary, like a higher salary for being a
Do you?
teacher. I think that like the
No, but that's
the
what
fact
universal
that we
basic
have,
income would do.
well, yeah, of course, but it's not just universal basic
No, I know,
income.
but I think okay. So
But
like,
like the
I want
minimum
to.
to be a teacher should be like much
No,
higher.
right, but if we had universal basic income, we don't necessarily have to focus on it. My point is that UBI is so very comprehensive. And before you had asked a question specifically about like how UBI would actually solve these issues, or at least push the take the biggest step forward, most bang for your buck step forward is my opinion, in like reducing or providing equity to these communities. Now, I had made a point before because you kept bringing up education about how the people who do the ones that actually get through educational programs are either going to leave the community or they're going to stay and not find a job. I think that we can agree on that because those communities lack pure opportunity. And so, like, argument was is that
Is what I agree with is that if you give more money to the people that live in those communities, they will be able to actually like create businesses in there.
Exactly. So that's why UBI would be better than pure educational funds. It would be the best bang for your buck. So I'm talking about providing equity to communities before everywhere else. Because when you take the best of a particular area and you move them somewhere else, you're just continuing that area being worse and worse. Right? People don't need formal academia to be happy and to be productive. There's a lot of people who do a lot of other jobs that can live very productive lives. The fact that the problem is that the wealth in the bottom 80% of the United States has dropped from about 33% to about 20% in the past 17 years. So, or the past 20 something years, right? So we have a huge class issue, and a big part of the problem is that technology is displacing jobs and driving down wages, and it's removing opportunity for people to actually embolden and empower themselves. So utilizing a universal basic income, and one of the ways that you'd get that money would be from taxing technologies, I think is the best way, because as we move forward, less and less opportunity is going to be presented. You're going to be seeing a lot of very low paying jobs with not very many benefits being produced, and a lot more high paying jobs like in STEM fields, because that's going to continuously propagate technology, right? So UBI, I think, is just better and more comprehensive at eliminating this issue.
Okay, I can agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Like for sure.
And I'm not necessarily against education. I just think that like we do have to keep in mind that we're only making so much money in the United States, and we're already spending $1 trillion over what we take in, right? We take about $3 trillion in, we're spending about $4 trillion a year. And in order to like move forward and cut those things, I think UBI can help us, because like you had mentioned before, defunding the police. Now, I don't think that we should defund the police, but what I will say, because I don't think that they would have the best bang for the buck, right? I think that there are a lot of these poor areas that actually do like the police to an extent. I think that the complete removal of law and order is not going to be beneficial. And while I do understand the idea of social workers being implemented more and like other programs to be implemented more, I don't think they're going to be working.
Like I think that for defunding the police and abolishing the police, it wouldn't be more social workers. It would be community-based programs.
Right, but then we go into the question of how much of those programs going to work, or how much of those just feel good Band-Aid effects.
Right,
and like, that's why I always come back to universal basic income, because that's not a feel good Band-Aid effect. Right? If you provide pure money to people, a lot of most people's problems in the United States, really in the world, but in the United States, stem from lack of finances, I would say, argue honestly. And like we skirt around it by talking about mental health, and I think mental health is fantastic, but we skirt around it, and like we have all these ideas of like more social workers, more community programs, but like why not start with more pure equity and freedom of choice and financial choice to people, right? Because if you put millions and millions of dollars so universal basic income, I don't know if you know what a universal basic income is per se. I'm not entirely sure. Can you hear me?
I do.
Okay,
I do know what that is.
oh no, I wasn't trying to be diminishing of you.
Yeah.
So like the general one that I support is like Andrew Yang's universal basic income. I think there are some flaws, but I think that it's overall a net positive. So it's $1,000 a month to people. So you take $1,000 a month, you pour them into these communities. People have more money. They'll be less stressed. They're going to commit less crime because they have more access to opportunity. You're going to see bigger businesses start to gravitate towards those areas because poverty, there's going to be more money to spend, and there's also going to be lower crime rates. You're also going to have the ability for people in that community to open up their own businesses and to have money to specifically invest into those businesses. Even if it's a little more costly to support a small business, they'll have the additional income to do so. After you continuously do that for a period of time, you're going to be able to increase your own taxes to actually have better school funding. But then on top of that, because you're getting $12,000 more a year, those school teachers who are underpaid now have a drastic increase to their pay. It's very comprehensive, and I think that it's a better solution than all these feel-good programs. And then moving forward from that, you can defund the police once you're seeing less crime in the area.
Sure. I think that like defunding the police will create less crime in the area, though.
Well, no, it'll create less reported crime in the area, right? Because
Well,
there'll be
yeah.
less police to catch it. But that
But if
doesn't mean.
you
But what's the
fund
benefit of that?
police if you fund the police in white suburbia, you're going to get more crime in white suburbia.
I would say it's marginal comparative to like poor areas in general. Like you're really not gonna see like a drastic increase of crime if you fund police more in like whiter areas, because they're not committing the same types of crimes, because they have finance, they have equity,
Well,
they have.
we can definitely argue that like another day, but my personal belief is that it's not the like amount of crime that happens in those areas, it's the like policing of those areas.
I would argue it's
because
both.
In white suburbia, yeah, but like there is definitely, even though it might not be the same crimes, there's definitely around the same like amount of crime that happens.
Can you give me can you quantify that? Because I don't think that's true. I think that impoverished areas have more.
Can you?
Impoverished. I will see. Here's the thing. I can apply like common sense to my argument. So, and the burden of proof would be on you to suggest that there would be the same amount of crime in a white suburban, or not even a white suburban area, just like a middle class area, right? I think that you'd have to substantiate that claim. And I don't think that you can, because I don't think that there is any substance to that claim.
Things that there's no like.
Would you agree that poverty is an extension, or excuse me, would you think that crime is an extension of poverty for the most part?
No, I think that crime exists no matter where you
It does, but do you think that generally speaking, crime is an extension of poverty, right? I mean, like there are absolutely like blue collar or white collar crimes, like that's scummy. But I would say, and that's more in like the upper class area. That's more of like a banking issue. That's like a lack of government regulation issue, right? But like you don't think that poverty breeds crime?
I think that the differences between like what crime like you're committing sure exists, but
what
no,
crime do you think would be committed in like a suburban area, or rather in like a more wealthy middle class area? Like what crimes do you think would be committed there?
In wealthy middle class areas, it's honestly like the same crimes that happen in like.
You think that there's rampant drug dealings and shootings in those areas at a higher rate?
There's definitely rampant drug dealings in that area.
You think
in those areas for sure?
There can be some opiate drug dealing, sure.
And apart from that, there is much bigger like the hold on, what's it called? Well, for example, in DC, in like the wealthier areas, there is a huge sex trafficking ring, and that's like unprecedented anywhere else, especially in low-income areas. There are girls that
you don't think that there are sex trafficking things going on in lower areas?
There are sex trafficking.
Because I'm not arguing that there isn't crime in middle-class areas. I'm arguing that there's more crime in impoverished areas, and like I think that there is, because poverty breeds crime.
Well, I think that crime, like laws, are what define what crime is, and I don't think.
So do you think that like? Well, are we talking about like? Are you getting to marijuana?
As I stated, what I said is that like, crime is committed at the same rate as like in middle class and wealthy communities as it
Right.
is in low
I
income
reject
communities.
that. I
It's
don't think
just
that that's
that,
quantifiable. I don't think that that's true.
well,
Your best argument. I want to because I don't want. I'm not trying to just completely dismiss you. Your best argument is that that in these higher crime impoverished areas, what's happening is that you're collecting people to be put in jail. And I would say the difference between poverty crime and crime in middle class areas is the fact that when you tackle crime in middle class areas, they'll go away because the only reason for those crimes is usually greed, right? But when it
really go away though.
I would say, no, just follow me for a second, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the crime that's being committed in impoverished areas is due to necessity. So when you take one man down and you put him in a prison system that's really just exists to keep people in there for slave labor, another person's going to have to step up to continue in their place because they need to make that money, right? Would you say at the very least that you can understand that point? That the crime in
I
lower in
definitely
impoverished.
understand your point. I'm just saying that, like,
You say you didn't understand my point, or you did?
no, I understand your point. All I'm saying is that, like, there's always going to be people that have to fill in for example, like drug dealers in middle class, like,
Sure, but I would then make the
areas
argument that
too.
there's going to be substantially fewer drug dealers in middle class areas.
White people are actually statistically more likely to be drug dealers than anyone else, and I don't know if you
What's
know.
the statistic? Like, what percentage of drug dealers are
Here,
white
let me
people?
look it up. Hold on. See. 2.7, like the rate is 2.7 times more likely than black people.
And so, like, we can also acknowledge that there are 4 times more white people than black people, right?
Well, yeah, sure.
So that would
But
mean
that
that,
doesn't mean that
that
we
would mean that relative to the community,
right,
there are more
but that
black
does
drug
that's
dealers.
not but when 1 out of 3 black men go to jail in their entire life and 1 out of 17 white men go to jail
Sure,
in their entire life.
and that gets into a conversation about implicit bias.
Well, yeah, but, like, if you're talking about the rate, right?
Well, right, but we just
One,
established that there's more
it doesn't
percentage
matter
black
that
people
there's
that
more
sell.
white people if more black people are locked up for that crime, right? Okay.
Sure, but that goes into a conversation about like the implicit bias in the prison system. I would argue that there's more crime in
So
these
that's
in poorer areas overall, because drug crime isn't the only crime, right? Overall, and that universal basic income would absolutely be a step forward to defeating that crime, no? Because it's providing direct opportunity to individuals and allowing them a pathway
like
out.
we both agree with that.
Yeah, sure. So that would be my, but that basically is my comprehensive first step towards reducing the marginalization of all groups in the United States.
Good.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's what I would say. So would you?
Alright.
So and then you had talked about police reform. I think I cover. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, universal basic income basically does that. We already acknowledge that like prison reform needs to happen with the recidivism rate at almost 80%. I think it would be onto like reparations. I guess if you still wanted to talk about reparations.
I mean, like, obviously, as I said, it's going to be really hard to implement, especially because it's almost like, it's not that it's irrelevant because there is a huge racial wealth gap, but it's so hard to
Sure.
implement now since it's been like almost like 200 years without slavery.
Mhm.
So, and it's just like, it's going to be something that's really hard to like advocate for, especially in the politics that we have now. I mean, like, there's not going to be like the Democratic nominee is not going to be for reparations, for example, even if it was Bernie, right?
Yeah, sure. Because it's very it would be very divisive, and I
It would
don't
be
mean that.
very
Yeah.
divisive because it's too late right now to like, and we're not there as a country to be able to like implement reparations without like basically a civil war going out, right?
Well, yeah, I don't think that. I think that like 85%
Right.
of the population is non-black. So then we would simply put 85% of the people in the United States wouldn't support reparations.
Well, like, for example, I'm not part of that. Like,
Mhm.
I'm part of that 85%, but I would like support it, right?
Sure, I
But
would say that there's some black people that would
right.
not support it,
But
especially
what
like
I'm
middle and
saying
upper
is
class
that
black
like,
people.
yeah, but what I'm saying is that it's going to be really hard to like implement. So
Sure.
I would definitely be for reparations. I am for reparations, but the political climate is not going to allow us to have reparations, and that's just the truth.
Would you also be for reparations for all marginalized groups or just
I would
black
definitely,
marginalized?
well, I would be talking about reparations for slavery. We can definitely be talking about
Okay.
reparations for Native Americans, right?
Sure.
Who have like, but the reparations for Native Americans would be vastly different from reparations for Black people, because Black people would be given reparations through money. Reparations for Native people would be giving them back the land from where they came from. But that's going to be much harder, right? I do think it's morally correct, obviously. Like, I think everyone agrees that it's morally correct.
Do you think that moral correctness would lead to like do you think that giving them land back would be like necessarily beneficial to propagate like society in general?
Well, what I'm trying to say with that is that, like, society would be against that. Like, I'm
Oh
sure
yeah, for
everyone,
sure.
yeah. So because people would be like, well, no, I live on this land now. Like, I'm not going to give up my house to like people that haven't been living here a long
Sure, yeah,
time, even
that's
though
true.
it's like rightfully theirs,
Mhm.
right? But so like when I'm talking about reparations, I'm talking about reparations for slavery, right?
Mhm.
But reparations for slavery, like slavery happened almost 200 years ago, and as I said, it's going to be really hard to implement anyway. So, but yeah, like what other reparations would you be able to give to other communities in the United States? Like obviously like non-discrimination like laws, or like defunding the police, universal basic income, all that will benefit all communities of
Mhm.
color, right?
Sure.
Reparations isn't necessary, for example, for
White
Asian
man.
Americans, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's
Because
ever
they
going to be a
weren't.
fair system of reparations, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like I'm saying that like you don't need reparations for like people that aren't Black, because they weren't like the ones that were going through slavery. You know what
Sure.
I mean? Um but yeah, so, and I mean like it's just like a very hard policy to implement, even if it's right. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I obviously disagree with reparations. I don't think it's a great idea, but I'm white, and so you could just dismiss that. I just think that instead of reparations, my proposal would be that we should start implementing policies that have a much higher positive impact on poor people in general, which would, since Black people are impoverished at greater rates, would have a much higher impact on Black Americans, but in a way that still was equal, right? So defeating poverty helps Black people more than anybody else, but, or maybe not only Black people, Hispanic people as well, but like it's still something that's implemented at a fair rate, if that makes sense. Prison reform, same thing. So I think that that's how I would implement some form of reparation, because I would argue that, like, let's say universal health care, some single payer system that made it free for poor people to get insurance. I would argue that like that's would be a form of reparations to an extent. Even if you disagree, I think you understand where I'm coming from with that.
And like I know what you like mean by that. It would definitely help close the
Sure.
racial wealth gap. I know what
Yeah.
you mean.
Yeah, and like
Yeah,
I would just say that like I think the biggest thing I would say is that like progress takes time, and fast progress is something that can be very volatile. So slow progress is something that I'm much more focused on. I'm more focused on a generation, 2 or 3 generations from now, rather than like what we can necessarily do right now. 'Cause I think that would be a system shock.
of course. I mean, like I know, for example, like I am the same way, for example, for like this election. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I'm still like, even though I'm a hardcore like leftist and stuff like that, I'm still voting for like Biden, because like he's the most like he has the most progressive like um nominee
I would
platform
I
like
would
in
have taken
American
I would have
history,
taken
right?
you for a Trump supporter. I'm surprised, honestly.
Wow, really?
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm kidding. All right,
I'm
fine.
assuming you're a Bernie guy, right?
Um,
You're or a Bernie girl,
I
right?
was I was Bernie or bust. I am like but I changed my stance just because of the immigration policies. Also, women like like female autonomy, like stuff like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, so like I mean, we don't live in a political climate right now where most of the things that we want to like implement, like at least like my political ideology and what I like align with, are going to be viable, because we don't have anyone in office that's going to like help push these like policies, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, yes, but I mean, like I do hope that one day we can do it, and I do realize also that like while I'm saying, oh, it's not really viable right now, so it has to start somewhere, right? So that's why like I like take part in like more progressive campaigns, stuff like that, and I like try to teach myself, like try to read theory as much as I can. I do read a lot of Malcolm X because he does like very much inspire me. For example, one of my favorite quotes from him about racial equality in America is, they always tell us, wait, 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 but how long can you wait after waiting 400 years, right?
Sure.
So that kind of like motivates me to be like, okay, like this is something that we can't wait for anymore, because we like Black people have been waiting for so long that we should like actually start like doing what people that are in the Black Power movement, who are like fighting for a more equal America, want to do.
Sure.
So that's just my stance, though. But
Do
yeah,
you know
no, this has been fun,
Malcolm
though.
X he didn't like white progressive liberals.
He didn't like liberals. I'm not a liberal, so
Oh no,
but
you're
yeah.
not. Well, you're a progressive. So the last thing I would
Yeah,
want to
but
leave
like
you
that's
off.
not what a liberal is,
Yeah,
though.
no. The last thing I'd want to leave everybody off with here is I think it's something we can both agree on. It's that there's never been like a time in the United States history where Black Americans have been given rights unless it meant some form of leverage. So, for instance, in the civil rights movement, the only reason that Black people got equal rights on paper was because it looked very hypocritical of us when we were engaged in the Vietnam War, trying to spread democracy when we didn't even have equal rights in the United States. So, I think that's something that's very important for people to understand. And then moving forward, as we fix the solution, regardless of what the solution is, we need to make sure we do it because it's right, rather than just because it has some kind of a political leverage point for everybody.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, so
and I'm really glad that we had this conversation. This was fun.
yeah, so I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, and I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I'm thankful that you had me on here.
Yeah,
This was nice.
Yeah, it was. So thank you very much, and have a good night. I know you have to go to work tomorrow, right? And enjoy school and everything. I get to get up late because this is what I do. So
fun.
So thank you very much for coming on. All right.
No problem.
Have a good one. Take care.
Yep.
All right. So that was a nice conversation.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.